Hello, Norbert. Thank you for agreeing on this conversation. You're here as in triple best as a professor at U of T, as a composer, and as a European, someone who was trained in Europe and came to North America to study and then to work. So that's what makes you, some of the things why they make you very, very special. So I had a few questions about this book that we've been reading by Scruton, in particular, the chapter on the music of the future. So one of the main points that he makes is that music and culture in general has a direction. History has a direction. What comes later is better than what comes before. And he has arguments about this. So how do you feel about tradition, history, both as a composer and as a teacher?
So I believe that tradition is obviously important for me. It's a point of departure, but the thing is that the tradition can act both as a limitation and as a kind of a springboard. If an artist is too attached to tradition, of course it limits him or her. If tradition is taken as something that we can relate to, we can rub against, we can establish a conversation with, then it becomes something very fruitful and transformative. So I think whether the question whether music or arts in general move in a particular direction, this kind of Hegelian view, it's a very complicated question, and it's of course yes and no. I don't think anything becomes necessarily better over time. If anything, I would, in my view, history is more of a rotation, a kind of a spiral in a sense, and it kind of bounces back and forth. Maybe in some way we make progress on some kind of spiritual level, but it's certainly not as kind of straightforward as one can imagine it being. It's very tempting always to compare the arts, of course, to the sciences, and because we observe that science is seemingly making very direct progress, sort of linear progress, or even exponential progress, depending on how you look at it. And it's tempting to kind of to look at the arts the same way, but I think it's different. In terms of concepts of beauty and what is beautiful at a particular time. Everything depends on the context. I think that if Scruton's book, for instance, if this book was published, I don't know, 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, it would have, to me, it would have sounded extremely conservative. It would have sounded like something, like someone who is trying to shut out a very natural kind of human craving for discovery and innovation. But in the context of today, at the turn of the 21st century, I actually don't think that it sounds conservative. I think it sounds in some ways progressive, because it relates back. It criticizes that which came directly before us, and that always is something progressive. We've had a century now of music that is very abstract, that is atonal, that is very experimental, and I think the time is coming again for a shift towards something, towards another, rotation of the wheel, and I perceive that in this book.
Do you think this tonality or the wheel, the change of the wheel, is given by the audience need for reconnection, or you don't think that has anything to do with it?
I think it's just I don't want to maybe misuse this term, but it's a kind of a zeitgeist. It's both the audience and the composers. I think the composers have a responsibility, or any artists have the responsibility to not only relate to the present, but also to look to the future and to kind of sense what will people need, not just even right now, but 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. And so I'm sorry, for a moment I lost the train of. Can you remind me of your question?
No, could you say that we're coming back to the sense of tonality,
Yeah.
and then so that Scruton's book comments were progressive in the sense that it actually is a rejection. We are rejecting a little bit what has happened in the last 100 years. And do you think this coming back, either back or as a spiral, as you described it, is it given by, that's because of the audience, because we lost the audience? Because I do see also as a performer, and your music that I played is tonal. There is definitely melodies, there is a sense of tension, there is a sense of the release. So is this given by, do you think, by the audience, or is actually our zeitgeist, if you want to use it?
The relationship to the audience is again, it's a very complex question, because it's a kind of a circle where the artists, in a way, maybe that's the wrong term, but educate the audience in a way. They inspire the audience by looking ahead, and the audience then informs the artists. So I think if that kind of cycle is somehow upset, then things can go a bit wrong, and the two parties can get estranged from each other, and that obviously it happened somehow in the 20th century, but there are also many other reasons. I think there are political reasons, there are social reasons, it's a very loaded cultural phenomenon that took place in the 20th century. So it's not a matter of sort of pointing fingers and saying it's this person's fault, or this person was wrong, or Schoenberg was wrong to establish atonality. I think that kind of blaming is the wrong approach, because again, things happen in the context, and they emerge out of what is in the air, what people crave, and a lot of good things have happened in the 20th century that have enriched our musical culture. So I don't mean to at all put guilt on any particular party, but obviously something has happened in the relationship between audience and art in the 20th century that has alienated the two parties to some extent. And I do think that probably time has come to again somehow mend this relationship, and I think Scruton is tapping into that feeling, and maybe expressing a bit of frustration with some of the things that took place in the 20th century. Perhaps he is too critical, but then on the other hand, it's very natural that we react strongly against things that we find oppressive somehow, and it's always this kind of cycle in humanity, that things that seem liberating at first become oppressive later. The advent of the atonality at the beginning of the 20th century, or even end of the 19th century, it felt very liberating, like we're getting free from a kind of a burden that was always there. We're discovering new horizons, and then by the time you get to the 1950s or 60s, it becomes like a regime. That becomes the establishment that oppresses others and prevents them from being free and creative. And and that's bad, of course. That's bad, but at the same time, it's something extremely human, and that kind of cycle of liberation and oppression and rebellion, it always continues. I do agree on many points with Scruton about the need to somehow reconnect with the audience, and I agree that there are certain things in the music of pre-20th century and pre-20th century music that are essential to kind of a healthy relationship with a slightly broader audience. I'm not talking mass appeal, because that's I don't think that has ever been the place for classical music, but at least to broader audience, things like melody, and some kind of syntax that can be understood, a syntax that comes from tradition, because we learn about relationships between harmonies, between we absorb rules of voice leading, and that creates meaning for us, so that a piece is not just some abstract construct of sounds, but it actually means something on an emotional level. And once you strip music of that syntax, it becomes just a bunch of abstract gestures, and will naturally alienate anybody who listens to it.
Okay, so I have another I'm always been fascinated by composition teachers, because I'm not quite sure how you're going to teach that. Meaning, so you mentioned, tradition is important, have a sense of melody, a sense of syntax is important. How do you actually teach that? Do you spend time addressing that, or you just analyze a lot of, so to speak, old music? How do you teach that?
Well, I do firmly believe that the more you know, the better you are, the better off you are, and that doesn't only apply even to just musical knowledge, but any knowledge, cultural knowledge, so it's good if I think it's very good if students study I don't know, traditional counterpoint, harmony, all those things, but that they study them with the understanding that they're basically researching fossils or something like this, that this is not life, that this is a fossil, so you learn from this, and you see what people have done before, and but then what's crucial is that you don't just blindly adopt this as a dogma that somehow applies to you. So I think a lot of the composition teaching that I do, I kind of assume that the students have their theory and harmony and counterpoint classes outside of my studio, and when they come to me, they present the music that they have written, and what I try to focus on is how much do you know, and how free are you, how to what extent are you able to overcome that which you have learned, because at the end you have to overcome. If you just follow those rules and those dogmas, they become dead. They don't mean anything, and creativity is always about discovery, and it's about risk and self-sacrifice and being vulnerable and all those things. I think if you just follow rules and you are safe, so to speak, you can never create meaningful art. I think at the dawn of the 21st century, it's very confusing for people to get a grasp on what is new and what is conservative, because it's many people think that, okay, well, if I write tonal harmony, that's conservative, and other people will say, no, if you write atonal music, that's conservative, because that's what came directly before you. In the 20th century. So there are these kind of very territorial fights between artists, and they can get very dogmatic and reject anything that's unlike them. I think the kind of essence of teaching of art is to encourage the students to become self-aware, to become both knowledgeable but also self-aware, and to detect very clearly where they are just following fads, where they're following peer pressure, and to discover themselves and what they really want to do, what's inside them, and then be able to release that, and at the same time to give it meaning by contextualizing it within tradition, because outside of tradition nothing has meaning. Like, let's face it, like there's always meaning emerges through relationship from one symbol to another symbol. So just isolated events don't have any meaning.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think one of the points that he was making is, as a composer, you need to be unique. I mean, you need to answer the question, which is, why would people listen to me? In this chapter, Scruton was making a big deal of tonality versus atonality. My point is that actually, it doesn't matter if you are tonal, but he was also making a point about Schoenberg, which at the beginning was very tonal. So I don't agree a lot with some of the comments, but I think is what you do with this material, which is I think what you're trying to say. You know, tonality, atonality, sounds, shapes, you can all use it all depending on what you do with this, and that is unique. What you do with it, not necessarily the medium that you use.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. That's true. That there is no the underlying point is that there is no definition, or there should not be a definition in the arts of what's right and what's wrong, because as soon as you say this is right and this is wrong, you are creating a dogma, and as soon as you're creating a dogma, that kills art. So you know, art needs to be kind of like I sometimes I actually use this metaphor with my students, like a butterfly. Like as soon as you catch it, and you squish it, and that's it's over. Like you can only kind of enjoy it as long as it's flying, and it's free. And the flight of the butterfly is extremely unpredictable, as you know. It kind of bounces around and is carried by the wind, and it doesn't have a trajectory. It doesn't just kind of go in a particular direction. It just seems to float any old way. And I think that's kind of what art really needs. And all these restrictions, it should be atonal, it should be tonal, it should be this, it should be that. It's really, in the end, if you look closely at this, it's just different sort of camps of artists trying to define their territory, you know, to saying we are right and we're safe here, you know, and you're who are outside, you're doing the other thing, you're wrong because you're not, you're right. And it's just a sort of a group safety procedure of identifying who is in and who is out. And you know, humans, as we know, are like this on all levels, not just in art, but in everything. And but as soon as you create that kind of group and the feeling of safety, again, art dies, because safety is not something that art that great art thrives in. You know, great sort of good art can thrive in those circumstances. You can write quite enjoyable music by being safe, but for the kind of music that really transforms people and inspires them, I think it cannot be safe, and so it will never fit into a particular category. You know, like those kind of categories of atonal, tonal. It's just it's almost kind of silly, you know, to 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 use them as barriers between people. That being said, I think there is a certain healthiness in always evaluating the humanness of anything that we do. In other words, you know, is with the arts, who are by definition, or by not by definition, but whose nature is in bringing people together and communicating. If somehow the art really is unable to communicate at all, and misses the mark, and is not memorable, doesn't have an impact, it, in the very least, it should make the artist question themselves and sort of reevaluate themselves. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong by doing this, because again, as I say, the artists have to look into the future. So even if a piece of art is completely rejected right now, that doesn't mean that the artist didn't tap into something that will be amazing 30 years down the road. So it's not an easy judgment, like, oh, you're out, you're in. It's more just the kind of a cause for reflection. About you know, the soundness of the, or the healthiness of the approach. In the end, I think artists, I often actually compare art to morality, in the sense that just like morality, there's basically two sides of it. Either morality can be selfless, or it can be selfish, and one is always tends towards good, the other tends towards bad. It's and there's all kinds of gray zones where those two ingredients are very mixed, which is very human. It's kind of similar in the arts where either you can be selfless in a way, just offering something and risking and expressing that kind of freedom of spirit and commitment, or you can be selfish in the sense that you're coward, that um, that you only want to impress others, that uh, that you copy someone else, or just fall prey to peer pressure. So I think art. I think Scruton taps into some very important issues, and he expresses them uh, in a strong way to kind of engender discussion and a reaction. And obviously this will upset many people, but sometimes it's good to shake things up and to upset people, because it makes them reflect, even if the initial reaction is very defensive. In the end, everybody listens and then processes things. Uh, so I think it's a valuable contribution.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned, actually, the two things you mentioned were beauty and humanity, which is actually his own conclusion, as much as they're a little bit abstract context, but it's really what we're all aiming, without knowing exactly and not agreeing on exactly on what it is. But I think we all agree on beauty and humanity. So I have one last question for you, which is, in your role as Scruton too, European who did come to North America, because in the preface here in the book, he's discussing that when he came to teach in Boston and his reaction to students in North America. So do you feel you could say something that did you notice any difference? Do you feel, or even when you're teaching in Europe, you're teaching here, is your approach different? Is there actually, do you notice any difference?
That's there's no easy answer to this question. Yes, there's definitely a strong difference between kind of the mentality of young composers, for example, in Europe. The countries that I'm more familiar with are Poland and Germany, and the composers that you would encounter in North America. But because North America is a huge kind of entity, within it you also find there are different sort of different microclimates and different camps, depending on who you talk to. Also, for instance, in Canada, there is a very strong distinction or kind of aesthetic difference between the composers who, for instance, are active in Montreal and the composers who are active in Toronto. Overall, there's quite a strong difference. I feel that perhaps, and I might be wrong on this, it's just my impression that the composers in Europe tend to be more more how should I say this? Not connected to tradition, but in a way, they feel like they owe more to what came directly before them, and they have a stronger tendency to still be true to kind of the 20th century aesthetic principles, whereas North America can be much more unpredictable. You have pockets of composers who are just like that, very very committed to the music that came out of the 50s, 60s, and in a way continuing that the tendency. But you have also people who are very strongly reacting to this and moving in drastically different directions. In particular, and I think that there is a much stronger relationship with popular music in North America, and composers trying to emulate elements of pop music and of film music. I think film music, video game music, all of that has a huge impact right now on the young generation. In fact, to the point where I feel like when we're interviewing first year composition applicants, I'd say 90% of them want to be film music composers or video game music composers nowadays. You know, that later changes while once they kind of discover a little bit more about music, and once they see that there is more to music than that. But it kind of shows you that that connection, and I think that's not quite the case in Europe. Yeah.
I see. Even as a teacher, I notice that I often teach my tradition, the one I grew up with, the one I studied, the one I have a feeling, in this I have to agree with Scruton, I have a feeling that I have to explain it, show it, the beauty of it, and explain it to the student. And I find that often in North America, this has been questioned. So students would question me, why is this relevant? Why is this important for me to know? I don't care. I'm now here live, and this is how I feel. And I mean, eventually they come through. I have to sometimes, there's like not violent reactions on my side, but I have to be a little bit aggressive about it. But it never occurred to me in Europe that I have to justify what I find in my past.
Right.
So even now I'm talking to you and I'm talking about my past. I feel it is my past, you know, whether you agree or not. You could be very avant-garde. I had my Schoenberg period, and all of us, but you still feel it's your tradition. While I find it here, in a way, there is more freedom from that, with the good and the bad sides of it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there does seem to be definitely more freedom in North America, but everything comes at a cost. So sometimes with freedom comes also a sense of aimlessness, which can be debilitating. And I find that often happens. So that young composers in Europe might have a stronger sense of the direction, but be more encumbered by the practices that they were taught. Whereas here they feel more liberated, but that they can also sometimes lack a sense of purpose. And you know, there is really no very good remedy or prescription for this. You know, if I have a student who says, I don't care about anything, I just want to write what I want to write, you know, I mean, I would probably advise them to do some studying, but at the same time, I feel like you don't know, maybe the student would actually create something amazing, you know, because there is no recipe, because it's so elusive what makes good art, and you know, very usually that's the people that you think would be making good art are actually not making good art, and the people who you think are not capable of it are actually producing it. Or there are cases where someone seems completely incapable of sort of valuable contribution, and suddenly kind of blossoms and creates something that blows everybody away. So you just have to kind of you know, you say what you say, you encourage what you encourage, and it all has, I think, some kind of meaning. Like, it all gets registered, but in the end, the artist has to find her or his own path, you know, and be very. What really matters, I think, is to be brave, to be brave about it, and to be unselfish. Not doing something just to impress others or to shock others, but to really be genuine in what they do.